the next project, for project 3 this semester, what we're going to be doing is painting one image using the brush tool and the smudge tool. And then we're also going to be drawing one image using the pen tool and the shape tools. So what I'd like to do today is introduce you to the paint tools. We'll start with those tools first, and then next class we'll start using the drawing tools. The paint tools in Photoshop, that I'm going to be talking about are basically using the brush tool and also using the smudge tool, which is hidden under this button right here. Okay. So we're really just going to be working with tools available in the toolbox. And what I'm going to have you do, if you prefer, is to find an image that you'd like to paint. We're going to use a source image and then paint it. I'm going to show you two different ways of basically overpainting or fake painting using a photograph for a background, a source image that will then sort of sample and utilize. Now, you don't have to do that. If you're somebody who is artistically inclined and would like to draw freehand, absolutely, by all means, do so. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, I'm going to be showing you techniques to get past any draftsman problems that you might think you have. And then, you know what? You'll get better and better, and you will need to use a template to trace. Okay, so as I said, what I'm going to do is use an image as a template to paint. Now, remember, we're going to be printing these 11 by 17. Okay, we're going to be making final product will be 11 by 17 prints. So it's good to start off, now that we sort of understand printing and everything, it's good to start off by making your document the size that you'd like to print. Why not? So I'm going to make it 11 by 17, 240. I'm going to call this landscape painting. And I have a blank canvas. I'm going to place an image here. Boy, this is not new, right? We've been doing this ad nauseum. Place an image. I'm going to find a picture of a landscape. And honestly, at this point, I am not worried about stretching it in any weird way. And why is that? Because I'm going to reinterpret this. We're not going to worry about this being perfectly photographic anymore. We're going to rework this. Okay? So I'm going to lay down my picture there. Now, there's two basic, easy techniques for what I call pseudo-painting, or using a picture and then painting off it digitally. The first, I actually skipped talking about a tool. The first way would be to make another layer on top of your image that you're sampling. Use your eyedropper tool to sample colors, and then brush with the brush tool. Let me show you how to do that first. Here is our, there's one other tool besides the brushes. Here's our brushes. Here's our eyedropper tool. What I'm going to do is just grab my eyedropper tool. By the way, the keyboard shortcut for eyedropper tool is I, the letter I. Right? You can see that right here. Eyedropper tool is letter I. Keyboard shortcut. It's going to show up in just a second, I hope. Yeah, letter I. And the brush is the letter B. And I'm going to keep my fingers on the letter B and I because I'm going to be toggling back and forth a lot. Okay, so I know my eyedropper tool, I know my brush tool. I need another layer to work on. I'm going to make a new layer. Right here is the new layer button. All right, make a new layer. And we have a new layer, layer 1, that we're working on. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample a color from whatever's visible. It will be that layer that the picture's on. I'm going to sample and then brush. Using the brush tool, I'm going to brush in. And then sample a different color by pressing I, and brush. And I'm going to sample again, and brush, and sample again, and brush. And maybe I'll sample again over here, and brush, and sample, and brush, and what am I doing? Sampling again, and brushing, and sampling, and brushing, and what am I ending up with? Well, pretty sketchy things going on here, right? And it is a pretty long and involved process, just like real painting. The advantage of this process, however, is that you have something that you're painting again. So let's say I want to work on these plants a little bit, make them a little more detailed. I'm going to sample it, and then brush. Let's talk about brushes for a second. I'm going to just grab a regular brush here. Then we're going to talk about changing brushes and brush types. So here I'm just sort of brushing those leaves in. Pretty abstract, right? Going in for that. Maybe I'll sample again and brush a stem. We've done some brush use when we were doing our layer masks, but here we're using brushes and color. Before, we've only been brushing black and white. Let me just talk about brushes, color, sampling, just so you know what tools you have at your disposal. Now, if you notice, when I was sampling colors, I pressed the color sample tool, right? Eyedropper tool is what I call it. And when you click to sample, you'll see a ring around your sample point. And what it's showing you is above is the sample that you're now getting. Below is the last color you sampled that you were using. Right? So I just sampled blue, and down here, look, the last color was blue, and now I'm sampling yellow. Everybody understand that? That's how the eyedropper tool works. Okay. Brush tool, we've worked with making a brush larger and smaller using keyboard shortcuts, right? The buttons to the right of the letter P allow you to make your brush larger and smaller, right? It's a pretty large brush. Here's a smaller brush, right? We also worked with brush hardness and softness. If you hold down Shift and tap your keyboard, you'll get a hard brush or a soft brush. These controls, by the way, are also right up here. If you click on this drop down, you'll get your brush controls of size and hardness. You also have this menu of brush shapes. And there's some very interesting things that happen with brush shapes. Let me just talk quickly about what these default options are, how to select other default options, and then how to make your own brushes. Default options are basically round brushes, shaped brushes, or pattern brushes. Round brushes do what you'd imagine. They sort of make a marker-like mark. There's brushier brushes, which are sort of listed right here. They're sort of called art brushes or texture brushes. And whenever you're using one of those, you see this sort of representation of a brush on the left-hand side. This will be dramatically different if you're using a stylus and tablet. This will represent the pressure and angle of direction that you're actually holding your pen. So here, if you look, this is my circular brush that I've been using there, right? Circular brush, circular brush, circular brush. Oh, look at this weird brush with this texture, right? Let's check another texture brush. Ooh, that's nice and sketchy. Now, the colors I've been sampling. If I want to just vary color slightly, honestly, sampling is going to drive, resampling and resampling and resampling is going to drive me nuts. What I'd rather do is just come up over here and slightly alter my colors. And I can give myself slightly different colors, which I could paint in. Right? Here I'm sort of making it redder and redder. Colors, by default, are available right there. Brushes, by default, are available up here. Now, there's one other brush type. So we have standard brushes, which are basically circles. We have our textured brushes, which I'm showing you here. We also have our pattern brushes, which are sort of represented down here. There's a couple of them. And what happens when you use a pattern brush is it does something like this. It's not really leaving a trail behind your brush, but instead doing something else that you have control over, yet it's not exactly as you might expect. And what these allow you to do is fill space with a brushed-in pattern, if you like. So, I'm just zooming out here, sorry. So, I was just sort of messing around right here. Here's other brushing I was doing. This is what I have done so far. Honestly, I'm not doing the assignment right now. I'm just showing you the brushes. I'd like to just expand a little bit on brushes. Any questions about what I just showed you right now? Brushes available through the brush tool. Options by default are up here. Size. Notice there's no hardness option for this brush. These scatter brushes don't have hardness. These artistic brushes don't have hardness. The only brushes where you can define your hardness are default brushes. Now, are we limited by the brushes that are given here? Absolutely not. In fact, we're able to load many more brushes. There's a bunch of ways to access the menu I'm about to show you. Honestly, the way I generally go to brushes is by going to Window, Brush. See this right here? Window, Brush. Another thing you do is double click on something. I always go this way. Brush. And here you have your brushes dialog box. Here's our real brush control. This is our real brush control. You go to Window, Brush. That's where you find your real brushes. Control options. Now, I'd like to just quickly tell you what options you have, and then I'm going to show you how to make your own brush head, and then I'm going to move on and let you guys work with that set of tools, and then one more thing today. So, just so you know, brushes can have a single size, a single width, or changing widths. And that's what shape dynamics affects. If you have a stylus, this will be controlled by pressure. See, it says control, pen pressure right here. And if you don't have a stylus, you can vary your stroke by changing the control on shape dynamics to fade. And what we'll get here, instead of, let me just turn this off for a second. Here's what my stroke looks like normally. Here's what my stroke looks like, right? I'm sort of replicating this by drawing right here. Did everybody see that stroke I just made? Now if I turn shape dynamics on, turn my control to fade, here's my stroke. You see what's happening? It fades out. It's sort of a naturally looking stroke. You could repeat this over and over and brush in. So you're changing your colors slightly and brushing like this. You'll find that you're getting a very natural, brushy, quote-unquote, look to your mouse movement. Okay? You can increasingly make this more so-called natural by adding things like wet edges. Right here we have a control for what's called wet edges. You turn that on, and your brushes will now have intensely more color on the edge and a little transparency in the middle. And that's a very sort of natural look if you turn on shape dynamics and wet edges. And if you're sampling, I'm going to turn on my sample. There's my new, let's see what color I want. What color do I want? There's the color. I want that yellow. So now I'm going to get my brush. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And now I could maybe brush in some of these flowers. Maybe I'll make my jitter a little faster. Let's make that smaller. Fade that faster. It's faster. Just giving a nice little stroke there. And here's our preview. This is the, I'm looking right here as I'm making adjustments. This is the stroke that I'm going to be laying out whenever I try to lay down a stroke with my brush setting. So I'd like to just have that. And look, I'm just laying these dabs down. Dab, 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 dab. Ooh, 2 dabs. They're getting bigger over here. 2 dabs, 2 dabs. And now I'm thinking about the green grass everywhere. I'm going to get my eyedropper tool. Maybe I'll make this fade a little bit longer. Oh, that looks good for grass. And I'll lay down some grass here. Grass, 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 grass. This is how you paint. Repetitive motions over and over. This is what painters do. They put their brush onto canvas over and over. And that is the same motion we're using, but with a mouse. Is it repetitive? It is. Yes. White. Oh, I was painting the sky, people. Come on, you gotta let me know if I'm turning my back at painting. Okay, so what do I have now? Boy, I'll turn off my background and see what I have. This is how we're going to preview our work. We always turn off our background and then turn it back on to work. Turn off our background to preview, turn it back on to work. Turn off our background to preview, turn it back on to work. If we're trying to render something that we've that we're sampling from there. Okay, wet edges I showed you. Another control is that you should know about is airbrush. And what airbrush does, let me just sample a color here. I'm going to turn off my background for a second. An airbrush, turn off, airbrush gives us a, let me do a darker color here. Airbrush gives a buildup of color over time. And you'll see that it gets more and more intense as I keep brushing here. Another control that we have that does somewhat the same thing is opacity. Notice how if I turn down my opacity of my brush, we're not turning down the layer opacity, if I turn down the opacity of my brush, you'll see the other colors come through it, right? So here I'm brushing blue across that. You can still see those yellow dabs. And we can layer and blend on our canvas that way. If you want to add texture to your brush, so all of these brushes that I've been using have been quite smooth. If you want to add a texture, there's this option right here called texture, which will give your brush an edge that has a textured quality to it. Do you see this right here? Texture. It's large. There we go. Look at that nice texture this brush has. Right? Everybody see that? I added texture to a brush. And I chose one of these textures. Here's another texture. Ooh, look at that interesting texture. I might want to make the texture more prominent by turning this up, right? The texture is on the edge of that brush. Let's say I choose a scatter brush and add texture to it. Texture, texture, texture. Look what happens. It should make it weird. One last thing that we can do, actually, there's a lot of things you can do. Here we go, that's what I want, texture dual brush. Is make our own brushes. So when we have these weird brushes, like these, the star brush that was scattering stars all around, all it's doing is turning on some of these controls. And if you look at any of these brush presets, right, there's 3 tabs in our brush palette. We have our brush setting, and on the left we have our brush presets, and in our brush presets are all those presets that we have right here, right? If you select any of these, let's say like our grass one, we can then see the settings that this has applied. We have shape dynamics applied on this, except the control is off, so it looks like it's not doing anything. Here we can have it, oh, there's a jitter that gives us random different sizes, right? Here's random different sizes. If I turn this down, all the grass is the same size there. We have scattering on. The scatter is turned down a little bit. If we turn it up, notice what's happening in my brush preview down here. Boy, those grasses show up everywhere or close by. So we can modify all these brushes. Here we have color dynamics turned on. What's color dynamics? Foreground, background jitter. The colors of this grass vary between my foreground color and my background color. So I can choose right here, foreground color, background color. Let me change my foreground color to a green, and maybe my background color to a yellow. And now I'm going to have a jitter between those colors if I have color dynamic on. And where's scatter? Oh, and scatter. I talked about scatter already. So we can create our own brushes or modify the ones that are there. The way we modify brushes are by going into the brushes palette and doing something. To make your own brush shape, you do the following. And this is something that you may or may not want to do, and that's fine. I'm just going to show you how to do it so you can. The easiest thing to do is draw something or brush something. So let's say I'm going to sign my name. So here's like my signature. No, I'm not going to. I'm going to, in black, I'm going to make a happy face that I think, oh, and why is that not black? Because my opacity's down. I'm going to, and I have airbrush on. Do I have airbrush on? Just go, oh, I have gray as my color. There we go. Here we go. I'm going to make a smiley face brush that I'm going to stamp all over the place. Here's my smiley face. I'm going to turn into a brush. You select. Make sure that it's on the right layer. And you go to Edit and Define Brush Preset. You click Define Brush Preset. Name it whatever you want. Sample brush, fine. And all of a sudden, look, it shows up right there in my brush presets. It shows up in my brushes menu all the way at the bottom. There's my sample brush. And if I want to brush with it, I need to deselect. If I want to brush with it, I can stamp, right? I can brush and have it sort of do that thing. If I change my scattering dynamics, maybe, I'll have it sort of splatter all around. If I change my shape dynamics, I can have different sizes. Let's see how that looks now. Make this a little smaller. Boy, I'm making a mess of this landscape. This is just a demo, right? So there's my sort of smiley faces getting scattered about. You can make brushes very easily by, let me just, once again, in case you missed it, I'm just going to make a new document because it's getting so messed up here. Using anything, really, you make a pattern of sorts. You use your rectangular marquee tool to select your area, and then you go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. Give it a name, okay. Now you're ready to brush with it. Okay, questions about making your own brush? Okay, why would you want to use that? Well, let's say we wanted to make trees. Okay, I'm going to just get rid of these. And you, let's see, you wanted to have a forest forest of trees. You can easily paint one tree, if you will. Whether you sample it or not, sorry. So here's my tree. And I'm going to fill this actually. Flood fill. Pattern fill. And make a selection. And now, give myself a different color here, background and foreground. And now, if I use this brush tool that I just made and give myself some scattering, give myself some shape dynamics. Look what's happening in my little brush preview here. Maybe I'll turn on color dynamics, which will jitter between the two colors that I have there. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. You can just see what happens. So now, when I brush, it's a little too scattered. Let's bring that a little closer together. When I brush, that's too close together. I'm easily sort of making this, where's shape dynamics? I'm going to turn my size jitter on, so I have lots of different sizes. Easily filling my space with a forest of trees, if you will. It's a pattern. Okay, so that's brushes. That's brushes, beginning brushes, intermediate brushes, if you will. Now you know you have brushes that are there for you in your brush menu. You have brush controls in your brush palette, and here's where you find that. And you can make your own brushes by going to define brush preset when you've used your rectangular marquee over something black. The black area is what defines your brush. You always need to have something black, otherwise it's going to not come out the way you expect. So that's brushes. Landscape painting. I'm going to show you another method of extracting information from a photograph and making it painterly. The straightforward and easiest way, I guess, of doing that, and honestly the brushes reinterpret and sort of mess with things, and that's good if you want to work with the brushes. There's another technique, using what's called the smudge tool. The smudge tool is a tool that does sort of what it sounds like. Let me. The smudge tool, here's how you don't want to use it. I'm going to show you the wrong way first and the right way. The wrong way is to select your background layer, the picture, and just start smudging. Here's what it does, right? It sort of moves things around and smudges things. You see how it's sort of, it's a little like the forward warp tool, if you will. Do we use the forward warp tool, the liquify tool set? Remember that? Yes? No? Yes? 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 That's just messing up your picture. Instead, what you should do is make a new layer. So here's a blank layer that I'm working on, and make sure that sample all layers is checked. I'd also check finger painting. And what that does is it, as you smudge, and here I'm sort of smudging, let me take off finger painting there, that's sort of trailing a little bit of color that I don't want. As you smudge, what you're doing is picking up picking up information from the background layers or the background layer, and smudging it onto your layer that you just created. And so what have I done? I've gone around and smudged a little over here, smudged a little up in the sky here. Let me make this a little bigger. I'll get a little more done. Let me smudge a little big like this and over there. That let me smudge in here. And now my computer is slowing down. But the result of this is that layer that we just made, the blank layer, now has pulled color up from the picture in the areas that you smudged. So in essence, what you're doing is sampling and moving the pixels around in a painterly way. Is that making a painting? No, making a painting is going and getting a canvas over at Pearl Paint and getting some paint and painting on canvas. This is digital painting. I'm going to show you, what time does this class end? 5:50. I'm going to show you work by two well-known digital painters who have come from the physical painting world and the way they work, which is not this way. It's just using brushes on blank areas. I'd like to show you, whenever this finishes rendering my result, I'm going to show you this result, and then I'm going to quickly show you a short video of an artist who, actually, and both the artists that I'm going to show you don't use Photoshop. They use either iPad or iPhone apps. But it's really the same thing. Okay, so here, it finally rendered my smudges, and here's what I've painted at this point, using my smudge tool. Is that real painting? No, of course not. But am I making something? Absolutely. I am working on this and making it into my own thing. You know, here I can sort of change my clouds a little bit and change it from, you know, I'd call these sort of normal cirrus clouds to weird, you know, what are they called? Like Heimholtz-Klein waves or whatever. There's very strange contrails that sometimes appear when planes are flying through areas of, you know, weird heritage. Anyway, so here's a painting in process, using our smearing process. Very fast, but it's not yours until you start really working with each pixel. It's fine to pull it up, work each pixel. If you want to add things into your painting, let's say I wanted to put a tree in this. Like, there's no tree in my landscape layer. That's not stopping me from putting a tree in. We know how to put a tree in things. Let me just place a picture of a tree. Here's a tree. All right, I'll place that there. Is that how I'm going to leave it? No, I'm not going to leave it like that. I'm going to put this under layer 2, which is my painting layer right there. And sample part. I'm going to come back to layer 2 here. Honestly, this might be the only time I ever tell you to use an eraser tool. I'm going to erase part of the sky that I sampled. Where's my eraser tool? And sample this tree up to that. So let's go ahead and get our smudge tool. I'm going to make sure I'm on layer 2. Make sure the sample all layers is on. And start smudging. Let's get this tree smudged up onto our painting. So now I'm smudging this on so that in essence, what have I done? Collaged, right? But instead of leaving instead of leaving it as a straight drawing. I'm going to interpret it with brushes. I mean, as a straight photograph, I'm going to interpret it with brushes. Why is that? There we go. And I'm going to maybe incorporate using brushes. Maybe I'll go back to my smudge tool. Where's my smudge tool? There it is. And blend it in a little better. Let's blend this. So on and so forth. Any questions about this process? It is slow. It is tedious. That is how painting works. Unless you're touching it with your mouse, you're not actually making it in this case. Understand? And there's different ways of manipulating. The person there's two artists that I want to show you. I'm honestly not sure if this guy pronounces his name George or Jorge. I'm going to call him George. George Colombo is an artist who's most well known at this point for his iPhone paintings that he. Yes, always run, run, always run. There we go. Okay. That he shows on the cover of the New Yorker magazine. The New Yorker has put his work on a bunch of times, and here we get to see his, his process. This lame. Sorry, give me 1 second, maybe I'll find another. Here we go. This will have two. No, that won't have. Sorry. Sorry, let me just find this URL. Here we go. Okay. Is that going yet? No, that's not going to work. Yes, okay. So here's a page that actually has a number of animations showing his process. So let's play one of these. I'm going to show you one that has a tree because we're doing a landscape. Only things work. River at night, coffee cup, subway entrance, phone booth, barren trees. Here we are. Just so you know, I think everybody should complain to OCT about how terribly constrained our internet access is. So here we go. So here's George Colombo sketching in, sort of in fast motion. Right? There's a time lapse of him creating a painting from scratch. So he's standing somewhere, choosing brushes and looking at things in front of him and rendering them on the screen.
Is he using his finger?
He's using his finger,
Really?
Absolutely. Notice how he's rendering things furthest away first and then layering on top, right? So that the darker colors that he's putting in front seem closer. Lighter colors seem further away. So that, how long did that take him? Honestly, I think an hour or two. We just saw it broken down into a minute, right? But each of those strokes, you would work and work and work. Digital painting. George Colombo, one of the preeminent users of, let me just show you one more, of digital painting technology, really only known for that at this point. Another artist who is now using this technology and sort of has a corner on it, if you will, is a guy by the name of David Hockney. And what he's been doing is taking his iPad, and I'll just read the images, and making digital paintings as we are. The way he presents them is quite interesting. He'll present them on the same type of screen that he makes them. And what I'm thinking about this time is we're making stuff for print, but I'd also like to remember that everything we're going to be doing will make a digital presentation of also. And we'll do that at the end of the semester with everything. What else? What else? What else? Let me show you. Yeah, see, so, he's doing things like, cute things like this with his image. Oh, boy, so, we'll paint a picture on a small screen and present it on the small screen. And it's a very interesting dialogue that gets set up then between the viewer, the technology, and the work. Is the work about the technology? Is it something that is it cheapened by the technology, or is it only interesting because of the technology? Is it something that goes beyond the technology? And those questions are still in play right now. And that's why it's so interesting to be doing digital painting right now. Just like it's really interesting to be doing animated GIFs right now. Because these are questions that are being unraveled daily. Boy, this is a terrible, terrible image we have. Okay, so you have two tool sets used for painting that I've introduced you to. You have your paint brushes, which have a number of brushes. I'd like you to explore them. That's the only way you get familiar with them. I can't explain every brush, honestly. That would take many classes. But the understanding that your brushes have a limited set of controls right here and a huge set of controls in your brush palette, which I drag down here. All right, here's all of our controls. Another thing to note is that you can make a brush yourself by selecting an area and hitting Define Brush Preset. The other thing we did was we used the smudge tool, and we made sure to sample all layers and work on a layer above, a blank layer above our source layer. Don't smudge on your source layer. Any questions? Okay, so let's get started. It's 5. I figure work for half an hour getting familiar with the tools, find a landscape picture. Make sure you can sample up onto that other layer. And then we'll work more on this next class, and I'll also introduce you to drawing tools next class. These are painting tools. We'll do drawing next class. Any questions? Yeah. When is this assignment due? Good question. So this, give me a second, sorry. This is the 28th today. It's due April 11th. We're going to work on this for 2 classes.
The landscape or what else?
There's 2 landscapes, a landscape and a cityscape. The landscape, the brushes, I'm encouraging you to find a sort of natural landscape. trees or something that has an organic form, rocks, flowers, what have you. With the drawing tools, we're going to be working hopefully with more hard-edged forms. And so urban architecture is really the kind of subject that works well with those tools. Okay? I'm going to turn off the camera unless there's any more questions that we want answered for posterity. Okay. So who came in late? Joanne? I got you. I need here. Who else came in after I called attendance? Maya? It's not here. Catherine? It's here. Great.
Thank you.